Good morning, students. In the previous video, I explained about pollination. What is pollination? Pollination is the transfer of pollen grains from the anther to the stigma. Okay, that is called as pollination. Okay, I hope children that you must have read the chapter and you must have read what is pollination. It is the transfer of pollen grains which are found inside the anther. Okay, so it is the transfer of pollen grains from the anther to the stigma of the flower. Okay, now pollination is of two types. One is the called as self-pollination and the another one is called as the cross-pollination. Okay, now we will see both the kinds of pollination, that is the self-pollination and the cross-pollination. Okay, so the first one is self-pollination. Okay, the first one is self-pollination. So what happens in self-pollination? In self-pollination, see, if the pollen lands on the stigma of the same flower or another flower of the same plant, it is called as self-pollination. Okay, so what is it? See, I'll explain. You have got a plant. Okay, you have got any plant. You can say, for example, if you have got a rose plant. Okay, so this is a rose plant. Okay, for example, and it has got many flowers. Okay, it has got rose flowers on top of this. Okay, now see, now these are the flowers. Now what is self-pollination? Self-pollination means, I told you children that in some flowers there may be both the male flower, the male part also as well as the female part also. Okay, so what happens in self-pollination? It is the transfer of the pollen, okay, from the anther to the stigma of the same flower. See, here it is happening in the same flower. Okay, or the flower of the same plant. Okay, or you can say that from here, for example, if this is the anther, okay, this is the anther and this is the stigma. Okay, so the pollen grains from the anther will go into this stigma, so it is going into the same flower. Okay, or the flower of the same plant. Maybe from here the pollen grains, you all know that it is found in the anther. Okay, so this pollen grains may fly, as I told you in the previous video. It may be because of air, because of wind, or because of insects. It may, the pollen grains which are found inside the anther, it may fly from this flower to and reach here. So since this is happening within the same plant, this is called as self-pollination. I hope children that this is clear. Okay, so what is self-pollination? It is the transfer of pollen grain. Okay, pollen grains are found inside the anther. Okay, so it is the transfer of pollen grain from the anther to the stigma of the same flower or the flower of the same plant or another flower of the same plant. Okay, या तो इसी फ्लावर के अंदर होगा pollination या तो उसी plant के दूसरे flower के अंदर. So since this is happening within this plant only, it is called as self-pollination. Clear children? The second type of pollination is the cross-pollination. Okay, it is the cross-pollination. Now here what happens is, in cross-pollination, as the name itself is indicating, here there may be two plants. Okay, children, I am drawing a very rough diagram. I am not drawing a proper diagram here. Okay, so this, now for example, these are two plants, okay, having rose flower. Now Here what is happening in cross pollination? It is the transfer of pollen grains from the anther to the stigma. Okay, the definition will be same in the sense half the definition. Okay, it is the transfer of pollen grains from the anther to the stigma of a different plant but of the same variety. Okay, for example, if here there is the anther, okay, there is the, here there may be the pollen grains. Okay, this is the anther and inside the anther is the pollen grain. Okay, and here there may be a female part. Okay, or there may be the stigma here. Okay, here there may be the stigma. So now what happens, because again due to wind, insects or air, the what will happen, the pollen grains will fly, will reach from this plant to another plant. Okay, so what is cross pollination? Cross pollination means when the transfer of pollen grain from the anther to the stigma of another plant of the same kind. Okay, it has to be important. For example, if this is rose plant, this also has to be a rose plant only. If instead of, for example, if the pollen grain flies, this is a rose plant and this one is a sunflower plant. So if the pollen grains flies and reaches here, the pollination will not take place. Clear, children? Or you can say the fertilization will not take place. It is possible only if both the plants are of the same species. For example, if this is rose, this also has to be a rose only. So cross pollination is transfer of pollen grain from the anther to the stigma of another flower of the same variety. Okay, so here since it is happening in different plant, that is why it is called as cross pollination. Here the pollination was taking place within the same plant. Okay, उस एक प्लांट के अंदर ही pollination हो रहा था और यहाँ पे pollination जो है दो प्लांट के बीच में हो रहा है. So that is why it is called as cross pollination. Clear, children? I hope this much is clear to all of you. The next we will do in the next video. Thank you.